The fog off the River Tyne came in low on a Thursday in November, and Sylvie Crane, midwife's daughter, and licensed apothecary of the Westgate parish, was weighing out dried valerian at her back counter when the side door of her dispensary opened without a knock and a man fell through it onto her stone floor. She did not drop the weights. She had been a dispensary keeper's daughter before she had been a dispensary keeper, and the side door opened without a knock 3 or 4 times a year, and it had never yet been good news. She set the weights down on the cloth beside the scales and came around the counter. He was face down on the flagstones. He wore a gentleman's coat, dark wool, the kind that came from a Bond Street tailor and cost more than her quarterly rent. One sleeve had been torn clean from the shoulder seam. There was blood in the back of his hair, dried dark, and more of it at the collar, still wet. His breathing was slow and irregular, in a way she did not like. The side door swung loose in the November draught. She shut it with her foot. She locked it. She crouched at his shoulder and checked his pulse the way her mother had taught her. 2 fingers at the throat, count to 10, note the rhythm. The pulse was there. It ran thin and uneven, like a wheel on a loose axle, but it ran. She had no way to lift him alone. He was a tall man, long in the leg, with the build of someone who rode regularly and worked with his hands more than a gentleman usually did. She fetched the dispensary stool, put it behind his head, worked her arms under his shoulders, and levered him up against the wall by main effort, the way she had learned to move a woman in difficult labour when no one else was in the room. His face came into the lamplight. He was perhaps 30 or a hard-lived 28. There was a cut above his left eye, clean-edged. Not a fall, not a blow from a fist. A blade, small and precise. Someone had wanted to mark him, not kill him, or had been interrupted before finishing the second part. She was already looking for the rest of it. She found it when she lifted the torn sleeve. There was a needle mark on the inside of his right forearm, recent, with bruising spread out from it in a pattern she recognized. She had recognized it before she looked up. Her hands went still for a moment on his arm. The bruising was the kind left by laudanum administered by force, in a dose larger than medicine had any business giving. She sat back on her heels and looked at him and thought about the side door with no lock that her landlord had been promising to fix since March, and the fog outside, and the fact that it was 10:30 at night and the street was quiet. She did not yet know that the man on her dispensary floor was the 3rd Earl of Blackmore, or that his younger brother had arranged for the drug in his arm, and the men who had brought him here to leave him in the fog. She knew only that the needle mark was fresh and the dose had been enough to kill a smaller man, and that whoever had done it had left him in the street behind a dispensary, which was either very stupid or very deliberate. And she had lived in this parish long enough to know that very stupid and very deliberate sometimes looked exactly the same from the outside. She got him upright again and walked him, more dragged than walked, through the interior door and up the narrow stair to the room above the shop, where her supply crates were stacked against one wall and her daybed stood against the other. She got him onto the daybed. She took off the torn coat and the ruined shirt under it, and she covered him to the chin with the heavy wool blanket she kept for late berths in cold houses, and she put a clean cloth soaked in cold water off a cut above his eye, and she sat down in the wooden chair beside the window and looked at him. His signet ring was gone. His watch chain had been cut, not unclipped. Someone had taken what was worth taking and left the man, or someone had taken what was worth taking and been interrupted, and left the man because the man was still breathing and became a problem. She looked at the needle mark again. The mark was not a problem if the man died quietly in a back street in the Westgate fog. The mark was a very considerable problem if the man lived. She went down to the dispensary and began making what she needed. She was still at the counter at midnight. She had given him the first dose of the counter preparation at 11, and the second at past, and she would give him the third at 1 and check the pulse again at 2 and decide at 3 whether to send for the parish surgeon or handle the rest of the night herself. She had handled worse nights. She had handled the night when the tanner's wife had delivered twins in January, with no fire in the room, and the husband 3 streets away drunk in someone else's house. She had handled the night when the cotton factor's clerk had come to her back door with a knife wound he could not explain, and she had not asked him to. She had handled every difficult night her mother had left her with, when her mother had died of a chest fever 4 years ago, and the dispensary license had passed to her name, and the clientele of the Westgate parish had accepted it with the quiet practicality of people who needed medicine and were not fussy about who measured it out. She went back upstairs at 1 o'clock and gave him the 3rd dose and checked the pulse. It had steadied, still not right, but steadier. The laudanum was metabolizing. His body was fighting what had been put in it. She put her hand on his forehead. The fever had started. She had known it would. She went down and put the kettle on and came back up with the willow bark tea and a clean cloth and sat down for the rest of the night. He said a name at 3 in the morning. He said it into the ceiling, not to her, his eyes still shut, and his voice from somewhere far under the fever. He said, "Wit," and then, after a long silence, "Don't." She did not know who Wit was. She wrung out the cloth and laid it across his forehead and did not say anything back. It was not her name he was saying. It was not her he was speaking to. She had learned from her mother that the sick talk to the people they were afraid of losing, and not to the people in the room, and the right thing to do was to be quiet and stay in the room and not pretend. He said the name once more before dawn, and then did not say it again. She refilled the kettle at 6, and changed the cloth and noted in her dispensary ledger, the way she noted everything, the time of each dose, and the state of the pulse, and the colour of the bruising at the needle site, and the rate of the fever, and the fact that the fever was, by 6 in the morning, beginning to break. Her assistant, a girl of 15 named Polly Breen, who had been with her for 2 years, came in at 7:30 through the front door with the bread from the baker's. Polly came up the stair, saw the man on the daybed, looked at him for a long moment with the composure of a girl who had seen most things that came through a dispensary side door, and then looked at Sylvie. Sylvie shook her head. Polly nodded. Polly went down to open the front counter. Polly had been a witness all her life. She had grown up 3 streets over in a house with 7 brothers and a mother who took in mending, and she had learned before she was 10 that the most useful thing a person could be in a crisis was quiet and present and not in the way. She was very good at all 3. She ran the morning counter without being asked, and she sent up the bread without comment, and she did not ask questions she didn't need the answers to. The fever broke properly at 9. He opened his eyes at past, and the eyes were brown, dark and very clear and entirely present. The fog of the drug gone out of him at last, and he looked at the plaster ceiling and at the stacked supply crates along the wall and at the small wheel window with the November light coming through it. And he did not move for a long moment. Then he turned his head and saw Sylvie in the chair beside the window. He said, "Where am I?" His voice was a gentleman's voice, quiet and a little rough from the fever, and the first thing he said after that was, "I beg your pardon for the state of your floor," she said. "Westgate Parish, Newcastle. You came through my side door at 10:30 last night." She paused. "The side door was not locked. That is my landlord's fault, not yours." He closed his eyes. He said after a moment, "My name is..." And then he stopped. She waited. He said, "How much do you know?" She said, "I know the needle mark on your arm and the size of the dose. I know the bruising pattern. I know whoever put you through my side door did not do it by accident, because my dispensary is the only building on that alley with a light after 10 o'clock, and somebody knew that." He opened his eyes and looked at her steadily. He said, "That is more than I expected," she said. "I have been a dispensary keeper in this parish for 4 years. I know the smell of most things." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My name is Lachlan Caird. I am the 3rd Earl of Blackmore. I am going to ask you not to send word to my family until I tell you it is safe to do so, and I am going to ask you to trust me on the reason, because I cannot tell you the reason yet without putting you in a position I have no right to put you in." She looked at him. She said, "The man who gave you that needle mark, was it a man?" He said, "I do not know who held the needle. I know who gave the order," she said, "and the order came from inside your house." He looked at her. He said, "Yes." She nodded once. She said, "I am Sylvie Crane. I hold the dispensary license for this parish, and I have held it since my mother died. The girl downstairs is Polly Breen, my assistant, and she will not speak of what comes through this door. You will eat what I bring you, and you will not stand up before I tell you it is safe to stand, and you will tell me, when you are ready to tell me, who I should be watching for at the side door. Is that understood?" He looked at her for a long time. He said, "Yes," she said. "Good," and went down to the dispensary. She did not believe all of it. She believed the needle mark, and she believed the needle mark had come from inside his house, because the bruising at the site was not the bruising of a street robbery. It was too careful, too placed, the work of someone who had done it before, or had been told exactly how to do it. She believed he was who he said he was because the coat, even torn, was the kind of coat that came with a title. She did not yet believe he knew as little as he claimed to know, because a man did not come home from wherever he had been and fall through a side door in the Westgate fog without knowing something about the shape of the thing chasing him. But she had time. The fever had broken, and the counter-preparation had done its work, and the worst of the night was past. She had time to learn the rest of it. She brought him bread and the last of the small beer, and she stood at the foot of the daybed while he ate, and she said, "Tell me about wit." He went still. She said, "You said the name 3 times between 3 and 5 this morning. You said it the way a person says the name of someone they are afraid for." He set the bread down. He said, after a long pause, "Whitmore cared. My younger brother, he is 24. He manages the Blackmore estate accounts in my absence." He stopped. He looked at the window. He said, "I have been in Edinburgh for 3 months on family legal business. I came back yesterday. I was to dine with Whit last evening at the house in Collingwood Street. I arrived, and the house was empty. No servants. The fire unlit. A note on the table in the front parlour that said I was expected at a private supper at an address in Sandgate, and that Whit had gone ahead." He stopped again. "I went to Sandgate. There was no supper. There were 2 men in the room. I remember the needle, and I remember the floor, and I remember nothing else until your ceiling." Sylvie said, "The note. Was it your brother's hand?" He looked at her. He said, "It was a very good copy of my brother's hand." She nodded. She said, "And Whit, where is he now?" He said, "I don't know. That is the whole of it." She pulled the chair from the window to the side of the daybed and sat down in it and looked at him steadily. She said, "I need you to tell me whether your brother is missing because he is a victim of this, or whether he is missing because he is the source of it. Not to judge the answer. To know which problem I am solving." He looked at her for a long moment. His face did not change. He said, "I have asked myself that question every hour since I woke on your floor." He said, "I do not know. He is my brother and I do not know. And that is the worst thing I can tell you," she said. "It is the most useful thing you have told me." She stood up. She said, "I am going to send Polly to the Collingwood Street house. Not to knock. To watch. I have a boy who runs messages for me between the North dispensaries, and he is 14 and looks like every other boy in this parish, and nobody looks at him twice. If Whit is in that house, or if someone who is not Whit is in that house, we will know by this afternoon." He stared at her. He said, "Why would you do that?" She said, "Because you came through my door, and I kept you alive through the night, and that makes it my problem now whether I wanted it or not." She paused. "And because the dose they gave you was enough to kill you, and whoever decided on that dose made a decision I take personally." She sent Polly at 10 o'clock with instructions she had used before, for the missing apprentice 2 winters ago, and for the woman whose husband had needed finding before he found himself into the river. Polly knew what to look for. Polly went without a word, and came back at noon. Polly came upstairs and looked at Sylvie and said, "2 men in the Collingwood Street house. Front parlour curtains open, but nobody sitting near them. The fire's lit in the upper front room, but the windows covered. The boot scrape by the side entrance has been moved from the left side to the right, which Mrs. Braid at the house next door says it never is, because his lordship's second groom is left-handed and always scrapes on the left." Sylvie said, "You asked Mrs. Braid?" Polly said, "I asked Mrs. Braid if she'd seen the new footman because I thought he'd dropped a parcel of mine. She told me everything else on her own." Sylvie nodded. She said, "The boy?" Polly said, "He's watching the back lane." Sylvie went upstairs and told Lachlan what Polly had found. She told him plainly the way she told the parents of sick children, the fact first, the implication second, the decision third. He listened without interrupting. He said when she finished, "They're in the house to watch for me. which means they believe I may come back to the house. He looked at the ceiling, which means they don't know where I am, she said. Not yet, he said. Or Whit told them nothing, she said. Or that, she paused. Can you tell me about the legal business in Edinburgh? You said it was family business. He looked at her. He said, the Blackmore estate entail. It was my father's intention when he died, that the estate passed to my brother if I died without issue. The standard arrangement. I went to Edinburgh to have a codicil added, a provision that if Whit predeceased me without issue, the estate would pass to a cousin in Dundee, rather than reverting to the family creditors. He stopped. The codicil was filed with the Edinburgh courts a fortnight ago. I sent Whit a letter about it when it was done. Sylvie said, What does the codicil mean for your brother? He said, For Whit, nothing unless I die first. She said, And if you die first, without the codicil? He said, Without the codicil, Whit inherits everything. She looked at him. He looked at the ceiling. He said, very quietly, He knew about the codicil before I filed it. I wrote him in October. I told him what I intended. He stopped. He wrote back and said it was a sensible arrangement. Sylvie said nothing. She had learned, from her mother, that there were things a person had to arrive at themselves, and that the best help you could give them was not to speak while they were getting there. After a long moment he said, he may not have understood what it meant. She said, Yes, he said. He is 24. She said, Yes. He did not say anything else for a while. She did not push him. She went down to the dispensary and served the afternoon counter and made a note in the ledger, and came back up at 3 with tea, and found him sitting up against the wall, the blanket across his lap, his face the colour of old paper with the effort of it. He said, I need to know if he is in that house. She said, Sit down. You are not going to the house. He said, I am not asking your permission. She said, I am aware. I am telling you that you have been on your feet for approximately 4 minutes after a forced laudanum dose that should have killed you, and that if you go to Collingwood Street in this state, you will fall down in the street before you reach the corner, and whoever put you through my side door will finish the job properly this time. Sit down. He sat down. He sat down the way a man sits when he knows the other person is right and resents it considerably. She sat in the chair. She said, I will send the boy to Sandgate. To the address on the note. I want to know who rented that room and when and whether anyone is still there. He said, and if Whit is behind it. She said, if Whit is behind it, I want to know that too, before you walk into that house. He looked at her for a long time. He said, You are not afraid of what we may find. She said, I am very afraid of what we may find. I have a dispensary I cannot afford to lose, and a girl downstairs I am responsible for, and a landlord who will not fix my side door lock, and half the North Parish who need their prescriptions written by someone who knows what she is doing. I am afraid. But the dose in your arm was calculated, and I did not keep you alive through the night to have you walk out that door and be finished off on the corner because I was too cautious to look for the answer. He looked at her for another long moment. He said, I don't know how to thank you for last night, she said. You can thank me by telling me everything, not the version where you protect your brother, the whole version, he told her. He told her about Edinburgh and the codicil, and the letter in October, and the letter Whit had sent back. The sensible letter, the composed letter, the letter that had not seemed wrong when he read it, and seemed very wrong now. He told her about the estate debts, which were considerable, and about the creditors in London, who had been pressing for 2 years. He told her about a woman named Dora Venn, whom Whit had been seeing since the summer, and whom he, Lachlan, had never met, and whose name had appeared 4 times in Whit's October letter, in a way that had seemed fond and now seemed like something else. He told her about the man his Edinburgh solicitor had mentioned in passing, a money agent who worked between the Newcastle and Edinburgh courts, and who had a reputation for finding arrangements that the courts would not formally approve. He told her all of it. She wrote it down in the dispensary ledger. She wrote it in the shorthand her mother had taught her, the same shorthand she used for prescriptions and birth records, legible to her and to no one else in the building. When he finished, she said, This Dora Venn. Does Whit know where she is from? He said. Gateshead, I believe. A glassworks family, she said. A glassworks family with connections to a money agent, and a brother who stands to inherit if the elder brother dies. She looked at the ledger. I want to know more about Dora Venn before we do anything else, he said. How? She said. There are 3 women in this parish who know every family in the Gateshead glassworks trade, and 2 of them owe me a favour. She stood up. She said, I will be back before dinner. She was back at 5:30 with more than she had expected. She came up the stair and sat down and told him plainly. Dora Venn's father was not a glassworks owner. Dora Venn's father was a glassworks creditor, a man who had bought the debt of 3 failing operations in Gateshead in the last 4 years and held it over the families like a stone. He was not a money agent himself. He worked with one. The money agent's name was Reuben Scobie, and Reuben Scobie worked between Newcastle and Edinburgh and had a particular expertise in estate entails and inheritance provisions and the legal gap that existed between a man's death and the filing of a new codicil with a distant court. The codicil Lachlan had filed in Edinburgh had been filed a fortnight ago. It would take 6 weeks to be formally registered. For 6 weeks there existed a period during which Lachlan's death would be processed under the old arrangement. 6 weeks from the filing date was 3 days from now. Lachlan listened. He did not move while she told him. When she finished, he said, he would inherit if I died before Friday. She said, yes, he said after a long silence. And after Friday? She said, after Friday the codicil is registered and the window is closed. He put his face in his hands, not loudly, not dramatically, just put them there and stayed still for a moment. She looked away, the way she looked away in the room when a father was told what she had to tell fathers sometimes. After a while he lowered his hands. He said, I need to speak with Whit, she said. I know, he said. Before Friday. She said, I know that too. She paused. I can get word to him, not through the Collingwood Street house. If he is in that house under someone else's watch, a message through the front is a message that goes straight to Scobie. But the boy who runs my messages, he knows the back lanes of this parish the way a fish knows water. If Whit is in that house and not there of his own entire free will, there is a way in through the coal cellar passage that the house next door shares, and Mrs. Braid will not be asked twice. He stared at her. He said, You would do that, she said. I would not do it if it were not necessary. It is necessary, he said. Why? I am a stranger who fell through your door, she said. You fell through my door and I kept you alive through the night, and that is the whole of my reason. I do not need another one. She sent the boy at 7 o'clock with a message written in her own hand on a slip of dispensary paper. 4 lines, no names, only the address of the dispensary and the words the door is open at the side lane. Come before 10. Come alone. And she told the boy to put it in Whitmore Caird's hand directly and in no other hand, and to come back and tell her what he saw when he did it. The boy came back at 8:30. He said Whit had been in the back kitchen of the Collingwood Street house, not the upper rooms. He said Whit had read the note and gone very still, and then looked up and asked who sent it. The boy had said the dispensary woman, Westgate. Whit had folded the note and put it inside his coat and said he would come. He came at 9. He came through the side lane in the dark, without a coat, which meant he had left quickly, which meant the 2 men in the front rooms did not know he was gone. Sylvie brought him upstairs. She went ahead of him on the stair and stood at the daybed and let the lamp between them. Whitmore Caird was 24 and looked 19 and looked, in this moment, like a boy who had been awake for 2 days and had been hoping very hard not to have to look at what he was looking at. He looked at his brother on the daybed. His face did something complicated and then went still. Lachlan looked at him. He did not speak first. He let the silence do what it needed to do. Whit said, You're alive. Lachlan said, Yes. Whit said, She said. He stopped. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. He said, Dora said you would be frightened off, that it would only be the needle and the scare, and you would go back to Edinburgh and leave the estate question alone. He stopped again. He said, She did not say the rest of it. Lachlan said, And Scobie? Whit said, I did not know about Scobie until Tuesday morning. I did not know what she had engaged him to do until Tuesday morning. He sat down on the supply crate without being asked. He sat down the way a person sits when their legs have stopped working properly. He said, When I understood what she had arranged, I locked the door of the house, and I sent the servants away, and I told the 2 men she had paid, that you had not come and we were waiting. That is all I have done for 2 days. Waited and not told them you did not come because I did not know where you were, and if I told them—" He stopped. "I did not know if you were alive." Sylvie watched this from the chair by the window. She had seen this conversation before in different shapes. The father in the birth room who had not known what was happening until it was over. The husband who had not understood what he had agreed to. The person who had been the edge of a dangerous thing and not the centre of it, and had not known the difference until they were standing in a room looking at the consequence. She had learned not to speak during this particular kind of conversation. She had learned that the most useful thing she could do was be in the room and be still, and let the two people in it find their way to the part that came after. Lachlan said, "Will you tell me all of it, from the beginning, from Dora?" Whit told him. He told him about Dora Venn, who had been charming in July and very interested in the estate in September, and had introduced him to a man named Scobie in October as a favour, a useful contact for the Edinburgh legal work. Only the favour had gone somewhere. Whit had not intended, and by November he had understood that Dora Venn's family and Reuben Scobie were a single operation, and he had been the way in to Lachlan's inheritance arrangements. He told him about the note which he had not written. He told him about the morning he had understood what Scobie had been engaged to do with the window in the entail, and he had locked the house and sent the servants away, and sat with 2 men in his front parlour for 2 days, not knowing if his brother was dead in a Westgate back street. When he finished, Lachlan said nothing for a long time. The lamp burned between them. Sylvie did not move. Then Lachlan said, "Whit!" Lachlan said, "We are going to the magistrate in the morning." Whit said, "Yes." Lachlan said, "All of it." On the record. Whit said, "Yes." He said it quietly. The way a person says yes when they have been wanting someone to tell them what the right thing is for 2 days. Sylvie said from the chair, "Not the morning, Friday morning." They both looked at her. She said, "Friday morning the codicil registers. After registration there is no window and no motive that Scobie's solicitor can use to suggest a financial reason for a false claim. You go to the magistrate after the codicil is on the books, not before." She looked at Lachlan. 3 days. He looked at her. He said, 3 days in your dispensary." She said, "You are not fit to be anywhere else." "And I have a back room with a lock on it, which is more than the Collingwood Street house can offer you at present," he said. "And Whit," she said. "Whit goes back to the Collingwood Street house and tells the 2 men you have not yet come, which is true, and waits." She looked at Whit. "Can you do that for 3 days?" Whit looked at her for a moment. He said, "You are very calm about this," she said. "I have been a dispensary keeper in this parish for 4 years. I have been calm about worse." Whit looked at his brother. Lachlan nodded. Whit nodded back. Whit went back down the stair and out through the side lane and into the November dark. Sylvie did not sleep much in the 3 days that followed. She slept in the chair when she could, and she kept the ledger and ran the dispensary, and sent Polly out to the boy at the corner, who was watching the lane, and she received 2 messages from Whit in Polly's hand, both saying only same in the margin of a dispensary receipt, which meant the 2 men in the front parlour were still there, and still waiting, and had not moved. On the second night, Lachlan was well enough to sit at the dispensary table, and she made tea, and they talked in the way 2 people talk when they have been in a small space together for long enough to run through the polite things and arrive at the real ones. She told him about her mother, and the dispensary licence, and the 4 years of running it alone, and the particular difficulty of being a woman whose authority resided in a piece of paper that the parish surgeon regarded as a technicality. He listened in the way she had stopped expecting people to listen, without waiting for the place where he could speak, without preparing his response while she was still making hers. He told her about Edinburgh and the legal work, and the 3 months of cold rooms and long documents, and the understanding that had settled on him slowly, over the course of those 3 months, that he had been managing the Blackmore estate for 6 years since his father's death, and had not once in those 6 years thought about what he was managing it for. She said, "And now," he said, "now I have thought about it." He looked at his tea. "I thought about it a good deal last night. When I was not certain I was going to be well enough to think about it tomorrow." She said, "What conclusion did you reach?" He said, that a title and an estate are not the point. I had decided this in Edinburgh, which is why I filed the codicil. The point is what you do with the position." He paused. "I have not done very much with it," she said. "You have 6 years of managing the estate," he said. "I have 6 years of maintaining it. That is not the same thing." He looked at her. "You maintain a dispensary and run the North Parish prescriptions and sit up through the night with strangers who fall through your door. That is more than maintaining." She looked at her own tea. She said, "I am not sure what it is. It is what my mother did and what I know how to do," he said. "That is generally what it is." They did not say anything else for a while. The dispensary was quiet. The November fog pressed against the front window, and the lamp burned between them on the table. On Friday morning she sent Polly for the boy before dawn, and the boy went to the Collingwood Street back lane and came back with Wit at 6 o'clock, and the 4 of them sat in the dispensary while Sylvie laid out what she had written in the ledger, the timeline of the needle mark and the dose and the bruising, which was her testimony, the name of Reuben Scobie and the Venn family connection, and the entail window, which was the motive, and Wit's account of the 2 days in the locked house, which was the corroboration. At 7:30, the codicil registered with the Newcastle office, confirmed by a clerk Lackland's Edinburgh solicitor, had arranged to send word the moment the instrument was received. At 8 o'clock they went to the magistrate. The magistrate was a man of 55 named Justice Oldford, who had been the North Parish's magistrate for 20 years, and who had seen most things that could come through a magistrate's office door. He looked at Lackland, and he looked at Sylvie, and he looked at Wit, and he looked at the dispensary ledger she had brought, and then he looked at the written testimony she had taken from each of the 3 of them the night before. And he said, "Mrs. Crane, this is a Bow Street matter, eventually, but you have been thorough," she said. "I have kept ledgers for 4 years, sir. It is a habit." He looked at her for a moment. He said, "The needlemark testimony, you are prepared to swear to this?" She said, "I am," he said. "And the preparation you administered?" She said, "Everything is in the ledger. Dosage, timing, observation notes. I kept it the way I keep all my records." He nodded once. He sent for the constable. The constable went to Collingwood Street. The 2 men in the front parlour were taken quietly. Reuben Scobie was found at a coaching inn on the Gateshead Road at noon, preparing to leave for Edinburgh with a document case that contained, among other things, a draft letter addressed to an Edinburgh financial firm with instructions for the transfer of the Blackmore estate liquid assets, a letter that had been prepared in advance of an event that had not yet occurred. Dora Venn had left the city on Wednesday. She was stopped at the Berwick border on Saturday morning, on a warrant Justice Oldford had issued Friday afternoon. The hearing was set for the following Thursday. Sylvie did not attend the hearing. She sent her written testimony with the constable and kept the dispensary open and ran the morning prescriptions and sent Polly to the baker's. The hearing went 4 hours. Reuben Scobie was bound over for trial. Dora Venn was bound over for trial. The 2 men from Collingwood Street were bound over for trial. The magistrate noted in his formal record that the investigation had originated with the dispensary keeper of the Westgate parish, whose documentation had foundation of the evidentiary chain. Lackland came to the dispensary on the Friday evening after the hearing. He came to the front door this time, which was the first time he had come to the front door. He stood at the counter, and Polly looked at him and looked at Sylvie and found a reason to be in the back room. He said, "Wit is going to stay in the city for the trial proceedings. He is staying at an hotel in Mosley Street. He has terminated his connection with the Venn family with a letter through his solicitor." He paused. "He asked me to give you his thanks. He said he did not think thanks were sufficient, but that he had nothing else adequate at the moment." Sylvie said, "Tell him adequate is enough." He said, "I will." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the dispensary counter and the ledgers stacked behind it and the rows of prepared bottles on the shelf above. He said, "I have been thinking about what I said. About maintaining versus the point." She said, "Yes." He said, "The Blackmore estate has a home farm, and a home farm means a tenanted population, and a tenanted population in a coal county means the kind of medical access that a dispensary in the home farm village would address." He looked at her. There is no one holding the license in that village at present. There has not been for 3 years. She looked at him. He said, I am not asking anything. I am saying it. You can tell me it is not a consideration, and I will accept that and come back another day for a different reason. He paused. I will come back another day regardless. I want to be clear about that. She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp was between them on the counter. His coat was his own coat now, not the torn one, and his face had the colour back in it that had not been there when she had checked his pulse at 2 in the morning 6 days ago. He had come back to the front door, not the side. She had noticed that. She said, a dispensary in the home farm village. He said, yes, she said, and the licence. He said, the licence would be yours. The building and the fit-out would be the estate's. The arrangement would be whatever arrangement you decided it should be, in writing, before anything was agreed. She said, in writing. He said, I have a solicitor I trust. He is in Edinburgh, but he will come, she said. I have a lease on this building through March, he said. Through March is enough time. She looked at the counter. She looked at the ledger she had kept for 4 years in her mother's shorthand. She looked at the front window with the November dark behind it, and the fog off the Tyne sitting low over the street outside. She had run this dispensary alone for 4 years since her mother died, and she had handled every difficult night and every difficult morning, and she had not once thought about what came after difficult mornings, because she had been too occupied with the mornings themselves. She said, there is one other thing. He waited. She said, Polly Breen. She has been with me for 2 years, and she is ready for a proper apprenticeship. If the dispensary in the home farm village takes on an apprentice registered with the county, she comes with me. That is not negotiable. He looked at her. Something in his face did the thing that had not been there when he was on the daybed, and that had been there, increasingly, for the last 6 days. He said, Polly Breen comes. Naturally, she said. Then yes. He did not move from the counter. He said, Sylvie, and then stopped. She looked at him. He said, the reason I said I would come back regardless. I want you to know it is not the dispensary. The dispensary is a separate matter, and I meant it separately, and I will keep it separate for as long as you want it kept that way. But I would come back without it. I want to say that plainly, because I have spent 6 days watching you be precise about everything, and I do not think you would want me to be imprecise about this. She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp burned between them. The ledger sat on the counter with 4 years of her mother's shorthand in it, and her own shorthand after. The pulse notes and the dose timings and the single entry for the night of a Thursday in November, when a man had come through the side door at 10:30, and she had locked it behind him and begun. She said, I would not want you to be imprecise. He put his hand on the counter between them, palm up, not taking hers. Just put it there and let it lie. She put her hand into it. He closed his fingers around hers once, and then he let go, and he said good evening, and he went out the front door into the November dark. Polly came back from the rear room approximately 4 seconds later and said nothing at all, which was how Sylvie knew she had been listening at the door, and which she did not remark on, because Polly had earned the right to listen at doors after 6 days of running the counter without being asked. 15 months later, the dispensary at Blackmore Home Farm was in its 2nd quarter of operation. The licence was in Sylvie's name on the wall above the counter, framed in plain oak, and below it, on a smaller nail, was a copy of the dispensary ledger entry for the Thursday in November, the one she had written out clean on a fresh page the morning after the hearing, in full sentences rather than shorthand, the way she wrote the things she wanted to be legible to someone besides herself. Polly Breen was in her 2nd year of apprenticeship, and was trusted with the morning counter alone on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and had opinions about the county licensing procedure that she was not shy about sharing with the county licensing board, which Sylvie had not discouraged. Whitcaird had given his full testimony at the winter sessions, and had come out of the courthouse on a grey January morning, looking like a man who had set down something very heavy, and was not yet certain how to walk without it. He had come to the home farm dispensary the following week, and sat at Sylvie's counter for an hour, and she had given him tea, and the particular kind of direct conversation that she gave to people who needed to hear things plainly. and he had left looking slightly more like a man of 24 and slightly less like a man who expected the ceiling to fall on him. Reuben Scobie had been convicted at the Winter Assizes on 3 counts, including the preparation of fraudulent instruments and conspiracy in the matter of the forced administration. He was transported in March. Dora Venn had been convicted on 2 counts and received a custodial sentence of 6 years. Her father's debt operations in the Gateshead Glassworks were under investigation by the Newcastle bench. Sylvie had read the verdict notices in the county paper on a Tuesday morning at the dispensary counter, with Polly reading over her shoulder, and had set the paper down and gone to fill the morning prescriptions. Because the morning prescriptions needed filling, and the counter needed opening, and that was the ordinary of it. On a Saturday morning in February, she was writing up the week's ledger at the back table when Lachlan came in from the estate office, where he had been since 7. He was in his working coat, the plain one, with mud on the left boot from the home farm lane, and he had the county agricultural report folded under one arm and a letter from the Edinburgh solicitor in his other hand, which he put down on the table. And he stood for a moment in the doorway between the dispensary and the back room, and looked at her at the table. She looked up. He said, "The Edinburgh codicil has been formally incorporated into the principal document. It is registered and complete, and no longer a separate instrument." She said, "Good," he said. "The solicitor says it is now as straightforward a document as possible." She said, "Also good." He came to the table and sat down across from her and put the agricultural report down on top of the solicitor's letter. Outside the dispensary window, the February light was coming in low and pale over the home farm lane, and the Tyne Valley was beginning to lose the last of the winter grey at the edges. He said, "I went to see my brother's grave this morning." She set her pen down. He said, "I went last month as well. I have been going on Saturdays." He looked at the window. I said his name out loud. "I have been doing that. It was difficult the first time. It was less difficult this month." She said, "Yes," he said. "I told him about the dispensary. I told him what was registered on the wall. I told him about Polly." He stopped. He said, "I told him about you." She looked at him. He said, "I am not going to make a speech about it. I am not good at speeches about things that matter to me, and this matters to me." He put his hand flat on the table between them, the same way he had put it on the dispensary counter in November. He said, "This is not a difficult question. The difficult questions were in November. This is the part that comes after the difficult questions." She looked at his hand on the table. She had spent 15 months learning what came after the difficult nights, which was that the difficult nights were not the point. The difficult nights were what you got through. The point was the Tuesday morning with the ledger, and the October with the first quarterly figures, and the county licensing board and Polly's opinions, and the mud on the left boot of the man who had come in at 8, and was sitting across from her now, with his hand flat on the table, and the February light coming in. Over the home farm lane she put her hand into his. He did not make a speech. He looked at her hand in his, and then he looked at her, and he said, "From here," she said. "From here." Outside, the Tyne Valley light moved over the dispensary window, pale and steady, the way it did every February when the winter was almost finished, the way it would next February, and the one after.